He only wanted to help a struggling mother buy a pack of diapers. But the next day, a helicopter landed in front of his home. Jake never imagined that a small act of kindness, paying for a stranger's essentials, would cost him his job. But what he didn't expect was that just 24 hours later, he'd be faced with a shocking revelation and a life-changing opportunity. Who was the mother he helped? And why was one of the most powerful billionaires in the city looking for him? Stay tuned for this unbelievable story. A grocery store cashier, Jake, a 22-year-old college student working part-time, was having a slow afternoon at the register. As he absent-mindedly scanned items, his attention was drawn to a young woman in the baby aisle. She looked no older than 19, holding a small baby against her chest. Her eyes darted anxiously between two essential items, a pack of diapers and a can of baby formula. She picked up the diapers first, her fingers lightly brushing against the plastic packaging. Then she hesitated, glancing at the price tag before turning to the formula. Her hand hovered over it for several seconds before she finally made her decision. With a deep breath, she chose the formula, running her fingers one last time over the diapers before heading to the register. Jake watched as she approached. Her shoulders were slumped, her movements slow and hesitant. When she reached the counter, she placed the formula down with trembling hands. Her eyes stayed down, avoiding contact, as if she was afraid someone might question her. Jake scanned the formula, noting how her gaze flickered toward the diapers she had left behind. He could see the longing in her eyes, the weight of her silent struggle pressing down on her. His heart clenched at the sight. "Just the formula?" he asked softly, careful not to startle her. She nodded, still not looking up. Jake hesitated, then glanced at the baby in her arms. Its tiny eyes blinked up at him sleepily, completely unaware of the hardship unfolding around it. Without thinking twice, Jake reached down, grabbed the pack of diapers from a nearby shelf, and placed them with the formula. "You forgot these," he said gently. The young woman's head snapped up. For a moment, panic flickered in her eyes. I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Without hesitation, Jake pulled out his wallet, swiped his card across the reader, and pushed the diapers toward her. "Take them," he said firmly but kindly. "You can pay me back whenever you can." Her lips parted as if to protest, but instead, tears welled up in her eyes. She clutched the diapers tightly to her chest, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Thank you." To her, they weren't just diapers. They were a lifeline, a small glimmer of hope in what must have felt like an endless battle. Jake simply nodded, meeting her gaze with a reassuring smile. "Take care of your little one," he said softly. As she walked away, murmurs began to rise among the customers behind her. A man near the front of the line crossed his arms, frowning. "You just gave those away? This is a store, not a charity," he muttered. A woman shook her head, adjusting her purse. "People shouldn't just get things for free. If you can't afford a baby, don't have one." Jake felt a tight knot form in his stomach. His fingers froze over the register, his heartbeat quickening. He looked up, meeting the disapproving stares of a few customers. Some looked annoyed, others simply puzzled. But none of them seemed to understand what had just happened. Before he could respond, a voice interrupted. "Jake, my office, now." It was Mr. Collins, the store manager, standing at the end of the aisle with a grim expression. Jake swallowed hard. He already knew what was coming. Later that evening, as the store grew quiet, Jake sat in Mr. Collins' office, tension thick in the air. The manager's gaze never wavered as he spoke. "I heard about what happened today," he said. "You gave away store merchandise. That's a clear violation of policy." His voice was steady, firm. Jake clenched his jaw. "I was just trying to help her," he said. Mr. Collins sighed. "I get it, but rules are rules. I have no choice. I have to let you go." Jake's stomach dropped. He nodded slowly, knowing there was no point in arguing. Mr. Collins handed him his final paycheck, and their handshake felt cold, final. That night, in his small apartment, Jake flipped open his notebook under the dim light of his desk lamp. He scribbled down potential job options: cafes, retail stores, delivery jobs, anything that could bring in an income. He couldn't afford to sit around feeling sorry for himself. Just as exhaustion began to settle in, he drifted off to sleep. But the next morning took an unexpected turn. Instead of his alarm, a deep, rhythmic hum filled the air. It grew louder by the second. Jake rubbed the sleep from his eyes and shuffled toward the window. His breath hitched. A sleek, black helicopter was descending into the parking lot behind his apartment. Dust and leaves swirled as neighbors peeked from their windows, watching the unexpected spectacle. Before Jake could process what was happening, a sharp knock echoed through his apartment. His pulse quickened as he cautiously opened the door. Two men in dark suits stood before him. "Jake Reynolds?" one of them asked. Jake hesitated. "Yeah?" The taller man extended his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. My name is William, and this is my colleague, Daniels. We're here on behalf of Mr. Sinclair." Jake's eyes widened. Mr. Sinclair, the billionaire? The one who owns several major tech firms and half the real estate downtown? William nodded, seeming to read his mind. "Yes, the one and only. We need to ask you something. Did you assist a young woman at your store yesterday?" Jake blinked, taken aback. "Yeah, is she okay?" William smiled reassuringly. "She's fine, but there's something you should know. She's Mr. Sinclair's daughter." Jake's jaw dropped. "Wait. What?" William nodded. She was struggling but refused to ask for help. Her father only found out recently what she had been going through. "He wants to thank you personally." Jake hesitated. This felt unreal, but when William gestured toward the waiting helicopter, curiosity won over hesitation. Minutes later, he found himself standing before Mr. Sinclair, who extended his hand. "Jake, thank you. Your kindness meant more than you know." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would do," he murmured. Mr. Sinclair smiled. "Not everyone would. My daughter told me everything. You didn't just help. You showed her dignity when she needed it most." Then Mr. Sinclair handed Jake an envelope. Inside was a check, a substantial one. Jake's hands trembled. This is too much." "Consider it an investment in your future," Sinclair said. "And if you're interested, I have a job opportunity for you, a place at my company." Jake's heart pounded. His simple act of kindness had led him here, to a future he never imagined possible. One of them asked, his voice steady and polite. Yeah," Jake replied, his confusion obvious. The taller man extended his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. My name is William, and this is my colleague, Daniels. We're here on behalf of Mr. Sinclair." The name hit Jake like a lightning bolt, his eyes widening with recognition. "Wait, Mr. Sinclair? You mean the billionaire? The one who owns all those tech companies and half the real estate downtown?" William nodded. "Yeah, the one and only." Jake stared, struggling to connect the dots. Mr. Sinclair was a man he'd admired for years, a brilliant entrepreneur and philanthropist who seemed to turn everything he touched into gold. But what could someone like him possibly want with Jake? William continued, "We need to ask you something. Did you assist a young mother at your store yesterday?" Jake blinked, taken aback. "Yeah, I helped her out. What happened? Is she all right?" William nodded, his tone reassuring. "She's fine and safe." He paused, then added, "Do you know she's the daughter of Mr. Sinclair?" Jake's eyes widened in surprise. "His daughter? Are you telling me she's really his daughter?" William nodded again. "Yes, we're serious." Jake struggled to process the revelation. The woman from yesterday, frazzled, desperate, and unable to afford basic necessities, was the daughter of a man who could buy the entire store. Jake's brow furrowed in confusion. But why? Why was she struggling like that? She couldn't even afford diapers. How does that happen? William hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's a family matter. Let's just say that circumstances aren't always what they appear, even for people like the Sinclair family." Daniels, who had remained silent, stepped in, his voice calm but earnest. "Mr. Sinclair wants to thank you personally. He'll explain everything about his daughter and their situation." Jake hesitated, torn between anxiety and curiosity. But when William gestured toward the waiting helicopter, he couldn't resist the urge to find out more. Grabbing his jacket, Jake followed them outside. The whir of the rotors filled the air as he climbed into the helicopter, neighbors watching from their windows with a mix of curiosity and awe. The helicopter landed gently on the estate's private helipad. Jake stepped out, his eyes scanning the grand property, but only one figure stood waiting. Mr. Sinclair, dressed sharply, approached Jake with a composed demeanor, extending his hand. "Mr. Reynolds, Sinclair began warmly, shaking Jake's hand firmly. Thank you for coming. I wanted to speak with you personally. Jake nodded, unsure of what to expect. Of course, but what's all this about? Sinclair's expression softened, and a hint of gratitude mingled with sadness in his eyes. It's about my daughter, the woman you helped yesterday. You have no idea what that meant to her, and to me. Sinclair gestured toward a nearby bench, signaling Jake to sit. As they settled, he took a deep breath before continuing, his voice steady but laced with emotion. She made a mistake, Sinclair began. A bad choice, really. She trusted the wrong person. A young man named John, her high school friend. At first he seemed charming, supportive, and ambitious. But as it turns out, John was only interested in her for her name, her connections, and the advantages her family could provide. Jake leaned forward, his attention locked on Sinclair. They started a relationship, Sinclair continued, his tone tinged with regret. Despite my warnings, she believed in him. She even turned her back on her family to be with him, convinced she was making the right decision. But life doesn't always work out as planned. He paused, his hands clasped tightly. She became pregnant, and for a while John stayed. He played the part of a supportive partner until the responsibilities of fatherhood became too real. Slowly he began to distance himself, making excuses, dodging his duties. And one day he left her completely, disappearing without a word. Jake felt a pang of sympathy as Sinclair continued, his voice dropping lower. She was too ashamed to come back to her family and admit what had happened. Instead, she took on odd jobs to make ends meet, trying to provide for herself and her baby. She didn't want me to know how much she was struggling. Sinclair's voice cracked slightly, but he steadied himself. I only found out recently through someone else. When I learned the truth, I went to her immediately. She's my only child, Mr. Reynolds. I love her more than anything in this world. I brought her and the baby back home, where they belong. Jake remained silent, his heart heavy as he listened. Yesterday, Sinclair continued, his voice softening, she told me what happened at that store. She didn't have enough money to buy both formula and diapers for her child. She was desperate, afraid to ask for help, and then you stepped in. Sinclair met Jake's eyes, his gratitude palpable. You don't know how much that act of kindness meant to her, to me. She said you didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, just helped. I can never thank you enough for that. Jake shifted uncomfortably, brushing off the praise. I just did what anyone would do. I saw someone in need. Sinclair smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how few people would do what you did. And my daughter. She wanted to thank you herself. He stood motioning toward the estate. Come inside, she's waiting to meet you. Jake followed Sinclair into the grand foyer, the elegance of the estate barely registering as his mind churned with uncertainty. In the sitting room she was waiting, the young mother he had helped. Her eyes were filled with gratitude and a hint of nervousness as she clutched her baby. Mr. Reynolds, this is my daughter Lily, Mr. Sinclair said, gesturing toward her with a proud smile. Lily stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you. What you did yesterday meant everything. I don't know how I would have managed without your kindness. Jake shifted uncomfortably, offering a modest smile. It was nothing, really. I just did what anyone would do. She shook her head firmly. No, it wasn't nothing. You didn't just help. You treated me with dignity when I couldn't even ask for it. That mattered. Her words struck Jake, but before he could reply, she added, when we went back to thank you, we learned what happened. That you lost your job because of me. I felt terrible. You didn't deserve that. Jake shrugged, trying to brush it off. It's not your fault. Things like that happen. Mr. Sinclair stepped forward, holding a slim envelope. We can't undo what happened, but we want to set things right. Jake hesitated before accepting it, his breath catching as he opened it. Inside was a stack of bills, far more than the cost of the diapers. This is too much, Jake said, his voice unsteady. Sinclair placed a steady hand on his shoulder. It's not just for the diapers. Think of it as a way to cover your college expenses. We've heard about how hard you've been working, and this is the least we can do. Jake's hands trembled. I don't know how to thank you. I can't. You can, Sinclair said with a gentle smile. And you should. Lily and I insist. Lily nodded, her eyes warm. Please, Mr. Reynolds, you deserve this. Sinclair continued, his tone serious yet encouraging. And there's one more thing. You lost your job, but I'd like to offer you something better, a position at my company. You've shown integrity and compassion, qualities we value deeply. If you're willing, there's a place for you. Jake's heart raced as Sinclair's words echoed in his mind. A position at his company. It didn't seem real. Too good to be true. He had worked so hard, juggling jobs and sacrificing his own dreams just to make ends meet. But now here was the opportunity he had always wanted. For a moment, everything around him blurred as his mind flooded with memories. He remembered his mother's words, spoken to him countless times over the years. Kindness will come back to you, Jake. It may take time, but it always finds its way back. He had always believed in those words, but in that moment, it felt like fate. How could his simple act of kindness lead him to this? A real job, a chance at a future he never thought was possible, a job that would allow him to follow his dream, to build a life he was proud of. He glanced at the baby in Lily's arms, then back at Mr. Sinclair. The weight of everything, the disbelief, almost overwhelmed him. His hand trembled as he found his voice. I don't know how to thank you. This is more than I ever expected. Mr. Sinclair's smile was warm, understanding. You've earned it, Jake. You've shown that kindness can change everything. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to overlook simple acts of kindness. Many people hesitate to help others, fearing inconvenience or judgment. But as this story teaches us, kindness is never wasted. A small gesture like helping someone in need can have ripple effects beyond what we can imagine. In our daily lives, we should strive to be compassionate, whether it's assisting a struggling stranger, offering support to a friend, or simply showing respect to those in difficult situations. Our kindness can inspire change. The world needs more people like Jake, individuals willing to help without expecting anything in return. And as this story shows, good deeds often come back to us in ways we never expect. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on how you can bring kindness into your own life. And don't forget to support more uplifting content by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your encouragement allows us to continue sharing impactful stories with the world. Thank you for giving your time, and we'll see you in the next video.